Hello and welcome to Cybeats Powerhouse Perspectives. My name is Chris Blask. I am the Vice President of Strategy at Cybeats. And with me today is Fred Cohen. Fred is the great pirate of cybersecurity. He coined the term antivirus in his PhD thesis, did the original research on that. He did the first cyber assessments of anything with Sandia National Labs and Burton Group and various other things, and has spent about as much time and effort focusing on this as anyone. So, Fred, hello. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm good. Where are you calling us from?
Well, I'm sitting in my office in my house in Pebble Beach.
In your house in Pebble Beach, which I know you've been building and rebuilding. You tore down half of it, rebuilt it. You've run various voltages and systems all through it. And I'm glad to see that you're there today hacking your way through life.
Yeah, we're putting in the LED lights around the thing that's in the kitchen entrance, and we have the color lights, and I got a bizarre phenomena. So the bloody lights are blinking on and off. Why are they blinking on and off? There's no reason. So I connect them directly to the DC power supply, and they're still blinking on and off. So I go in with my voltage generator and current generator and plug that in to debug it, and now it's all white. It's no problem. So wait a minute. Two plugs in the AC. I plug something else in the AC, and now the LEDs work right? But when I unplug it, the LEDs no longer work right, even though it's not on the same DC channel as the LEDs. So I figure the switching power supply for the LEDs sucks, and it's having some sort of a current dropout. So now I'm going to be adding a capacitor and a resistor or something, so that the LEDs stay on properly. So this is the kind of ridiculous crap that we see today in the IoT world, which we need to fix. And I consider that to be a security problem.
And it is, right? And this is the point. As you and I discuss a lot, all of us folks, if you and I can't make this stuff work, what chance does my mom have? What chance?
Right. I have a friggin' PhD in electrical engineering, and the lights are flashing on and off. Why is that?
Right.
All right,
and for the record,
also I need to get a new soldering gun, because I have a soldering iron from 1965, and really it's the same one I've been using, and it's getting to the point where it takes like 15 minutes to heat up. So you really got to prepare to do this work.
So it's the maturity levels, right? And hacking your way through life to me always comes down to figuring out what maturity level we're at in what. So it's not worth the effort to do that, which maybe is the way it should be done, because we can't get there from here yet. And
the problem is, Chris, if you look at me, I should be at a high maturity level, and yet I'm like a little kid.
Well, oddly enough, Anthony and we're talking about this earlier today. I think the achievable maturity level in life and everything is probably lower than we think it is. But attestations, I want to attest to some things, right? And as I mentioned in the beginning, you did some of the earliest cyber assessments of anything. You have developed the structure at all.net.
Hallelujah. I believe hallelujah. You're attesting. Hallelujah.
Exactly. And attestation sharing systems and so forth, as you know, has been all over my radar for the last couple of years.
Yeah, D-bomb and S-bomb,
the supply chain. Yeah. Right. So I want to look back and say, it's really about attestations, right? In your earliest days, when you were first asked to go cyber assess something, you walked around and said, what's this, what that, and people attested to you. And those attestations were meant to be things that you could act on. I'm going to build a plan for this based on what you told me, the data you showed me, the documents, whatever it is.
Yeah, I never believed any of it. Let's be clear. So what happens is when you do one of these assessments, you ask them all sorts of questions and you write down what they said, and then you check it out. And it's not only is it only, half true or less, but it's not because they were lying.
Well, Anthony, put up the first question, because that's this one. Go ahead. So because this is the question, right? How much should we believe anything we've ever been told? You're already going there. Go ahead.
So it's a matter of trust. And now we're talking about zero trust, because I'm just going to take you right to it. Don't trust zero trust. The problem is we do have to trust things, and we have to come to trust things, or else you can just forget about everything or anything working in the modern world. And in fact, even in the ancient world, even when you're living in the jungle by yourself, you still have to trust things, because when you throw the knife, if gravity changes, it's not going to hit the target. And when you go to strangle the bear, if you don't trust that you're going to be able to strangle it, it's going to kill you by the time you get exhausted and let go. So you're always having to trust things, and that's what science is about: developing and building up that trust through hypotheses and experimentation for refutation. So this challenge of trust has to do with believability. So I always tell people I believe anything you say until I see that it's wrong, and usually that means 50% of it's wrong, not because you lied, but because you didn't know. Because one of the big things in these assessments is you're looking at the elephant, and they're each saying, the elephant, right? They're each saying, oh, I have a trunk. Oh, no, I have a tail. The blind man and the elephant. Because especially in a company or large organizations especially, nobody sees the whole picture. And one of the nifty things about doing an assessment is you walk around and look at all this stuff. You actually get to see the whole picture, and nobody's bothered to look at it before, apparently. And you explain to them that all their security isn't going to work because I saw cigarette butts behind the back door. Well, so what, you saw cigarette butts, that doesn't mean it's not going to work. And you say, you're right, that's not what it means. So we did an experiment to demonstrate it. I stood out back with a cigarette and waited for somebody else to smoke. And then when they went back in, I went with them, and they're my good buddies. And now, by the way, here's your financials, and here's one of your checks. And, Jerry, who you were having an affair with, so you believe me now? I don't have to keep going further, right?
Right.
So, that's how it is, right? People are people, and you have to trust that they're sincere and honest most of the time. There are obviously fraudsters out there. So you check it against, independent information. You disaggregate risks by not piling too much risks on low surety stuff, but you're still managing risk. So I'm sorry, I went about 400 steps beyond what you were asking.
But you used a key word there, surety, right? This is a word that outside of my world working with you and a handful of people, I don't hear very often. And, with Cybeats, we've gone through bargaining exercises, and the word certainty, we find, has not been used in the cybersecurity industry much at all.
Probably a good thing, because we're not that certain. That surety is the extent to which you're certain, right? And more important, to which you can reasonably be certain, right? Trustworthy as opposed to trusted, right? So there are certain mechanisms that you can rely on, trust, that are more sure. Like, physical things like diodes. Physical diodes have physical properties associated with physics, and we know how they work at a pretty deep level. And so if we send information through diodes, one way it'll go and the other way it won't go. Not to say that it's impossible to bypass it, but rather in the normal operating situation, you can control that. You also then know the limits of the environmental factors in which that operates, because guess what? Engineers do that all the time. So if it's too cold or too hot, or there's too much radiation or whatever, then it's not going to work right. So you put bounds on the operation. Oh, we don't do this with computers. Oh, yeah, that's right. So I connect a computer to the internet, and you when I connect a computer to the internet, I figure out how many bits per second it'll take, how many packets can be formed with that, how many SYN packets can be formed with that, and therefore how long I can wait before I have to refuse communication with SYNs that haven't closed the TCP channel, because I don't want denial of services. So I know the bandwidth, I know the number of sessions I can take simultaneously, I know how many bits it takes, I can calculate it. But most people don't bother to calculate it, and they're surprised when they have denial of services. They're surprised because they didn't bother to look. So, being certain has to do with spending the time and effort to figure it out, having necessary expertise to be, reasonable and prudent.
Reasonable and prudent. Right, which kind of takes us to our next question, right? So I agree, as you know, I think that most things, Ackerman was right. You look at a company and say, well, you're in business, so we've been making good choices, obviously, or you'll be one of those companies who's not in business anymore. And
Chris, I'm going to ask you a question. What did I have to drink this morning?
Not coffee? Did you have coffee? You're moving low.
I didn't have coffee.
Tea.
I had a cup of tea, and that's why I'm speaking so quickly. And Chris knows that, because Chris knows me, because we've known each other for a long time, and we've developed trust over a long time, gotten to know each other. So he can reliably say, oh, Fred had caffeine. He's talking quickly. Right? Well, and Chris also knows if I had a cup of coffee, I'd be talking at 10 times this speed. But he didn't remember it. So I'm not sure. Is this really Chris? I think
it probably is. But so looking back, so over the span of cybersecurity, which is kind of, the space we're talking about, when people are first asked things, their attestations are generally as true as far as they know. Malice aforethought tends not to be a big part of it. It's you find organizational
except
deficiencies.
sometimes, as we encounter in assessments and in other efforts from time to time.
Right. So in general, we've been able to believe what we were told. But the next question is, how much should we believe what we're being told now? And what I mean by this is structurally, how we want to look at this globally, nationally, across enterprises. Are we getting better at it?
Here, you should believe everything I say about as far as you can throw it. And I'm not light. So generally speaking, trust but verify. Not really. It's not. But the way people work, and this is one of the problems in influence operations with defending against it. If I say something that makes sense to you, you'll tend to believe it. So I'm a emperor has no clothes person. I keep on pointing out, things that people say that are ridiculous on their face, or ridiculous when you look into depth, because you find inconsistencies. So mostly the way we detect that things are not right is by inconsistencies. And the other one is, stuff that we believe, and you have to be flexible in your mind in changing your beliefs, or else, you're going to be stuck. Well, I was born a long time ago. I would be stuck with the way everything worked, when I went to school. And guess what? It's been a while. Much of that stuff is still true, right? All the physics hasn't really changed that much. The trust in cryptographic systems. This is one of the things we've learned over centuries. Don't. Let's just start there. No cryptographic system has survived more than so many years before somebody found a way to break it. And when I say break, I don't want to go into the technical details. So defeating cryptographic system works all the time. And even if the math of the cryptography is perfect, it doesn't help you because the end system is running Windows. You're running one of these.
And displaying the screen. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, flashes a light, right? So what you should do is you should, in your mind, understand how things work in your context and question everything. Not over question it. You should trust that the people talking to you are trying to say to you what they're saying to you, and that most of them are honest and sincere. On the other hand, they may be going from false assumptions. So what, 30% of the United States now believes that vaccines are, weapons intended to kill you instead of things to keep you from dying, right? I'm sorry, it's now 28% because 2% have died. But, nonetheless, from the disease, not from the vaccines. So they believe that because they're being told that by people that they trust. And I believe that vaccines are effective because I've been told that by people I trust. So the question is, what do we really trust, and how do we come to that trust? And I think the way you come to that trust, my view, is by using science, right? That is to say, everything is a theory, and you test it by trying to refute it. And when you can't refute it, then you've confirmed it, which doesn't make it right, but it's good enough for now. And how much testing, how much surety you need to achieve depends on, what it's being used for. So if I'm trying to, prevent nuclear weapons from accidentally exploding, then probably I want a higher surety than if I'm trying to make sure that this cup of water that I have here this morning is perfectly pure. By the way, good to see you.
Cheers. Good to see you too.
So the consequences drive all this stuff. And so one of the other things people do is they ignore consequences. So if you're telling me something trivial and it makes you happy to tell me and it makes me happy to hear it, that's all fine and dandy, and it doesn't matter if it's wrong.
Well, you took a fork there that I think is worth digging into. Let's throw the gauntlet down, right? We live in a world where people are believing in belief less and less, right? With misinformation, disinformation, as you say, when you put these things together, most people out there believe things because they believe they're true, not because they're good or bad or whatnot, but they just believe it's true. And we take, as I have a background in these sort of things, and it's as we take the cyber stuff of software supply chain security, of how do I say what's the ending inventory of the software that I'm using right now, and use that. The attestation part of it, is looming over us because we get past the first couple steps. How do I know? Not me, and I'm not, your massive consumer buying directly from the supplier. I bought it from somebody who bought it from somebody who bought it from somebody, and it's the 17th thing in my thing, and I don't freaking know. And if we can solve that, and if we can't solve that at a certain point, and I think the technical infrastructure does not work, so therefore we will solve it. And I think this sort of takes us into our last question, right? I always try to look out in the future in the end of these sort of conversations, and I will influence your answer because I know you won't be influenced by it, but I'm tending to think that these infrastructures we're putting together to raise surety of attestations for all this technical supply chain security stuff plays into disinformation and plays into the public square, where we can have information in public that we have more or less of a reason to believe or not. And there's a positive future in information attestation ahead of us.
So did you read my January article in all.net that's what was the title of it? Theorem 0, I trust, and then in parens, believe me. So fundamentally, we'll get to the technical later, right? I mean, this is a mistake a lot of people make. They think cybersecurity is about technical, right? And certainly there's a lot of technical in it, but the truth is it starts with governance, and it starts with people and the mechanisms that they use and influence operations and so forth. And when we ignore this, we do so at our peril. I think you've heard that quote from somewhere else. So in that article, one page, try to get them to one page, except February did about 4 because I just felt like typing more because my carpal tunnel was feeling better. So the key here is that we can't survive without trust. Quite literally, human beings cannot survive without trust. And probably most other creatures that have what we'll call higher level, brain function, but it's everything's relative. It's like, when the alien comes to the earth and looks at human beings and says there's no intelligent life, they're probably right. Is it going to be possible to believe more? So as a society, we need to stop this destructive thing that's brought to us by Russian propaganda, amplified by US people who are trying to separate us so that they can make more money or take more from us, right? This thing of disbelieving everybody is going to kill you and me and everybody else. When you walk down the street and there are cars, you're trusting those people not to turn their car and hit you. And every once in a while, somebody does. And that's why we have a legal system. But for the most part, if you're not going to walk down the street because you're afraid cars are going to hit you, and cars aren't going to drive down the street because they're afraid somebody will shoot them, then we're going to have a society where nobody goes anywhere or does anything, and we're all just going to collapse anyway. So you got to start trusting things. So the question is, what's worthy of what trust? And that's sort of the fundamental issue we're facing today as a society. And this thing where you distrust government and you distrust science and you distrust everything, except somebody who, so far has only lied to you, demonstrably, then you're going to get what you reap what you sow, right? So in terms of attestation channels, in terms of the technological issues here, the fundamental challenge is interdependencies, right? And risk aggregation associated with interdependencies and change control, because all of this stuff along that interdependency chain is changing. And so you have to manage those changes, the implications of those changes, right? And the disaggregation of risk is countering all this by not being fully dependent or wholly dependent on any one of these things. And of course, because it may look like they're independent until somewhere back in the supply chain where they're dependent again, like the fiber in New England that gets cut by a backhoe that disrupts, 50% of the internet, not today, but then, right? So the path to this is again, risk management, deciding how much resiliency, how much redundancy you need, under what circumstances, what the environment is that you're living in. And this goes back to engineering design, right? So engineers sort of start out fundamentally. In the first course I had in engineering when I was in school, and the first lesson in that first course, the first thing they taught me was, how do you measure stuff? And what they taught us is that the thing you're measuring it with changes with what you're measuring, right? So you need to start by figuring out what to measure and how to measure it and how the measurement is affected, and figure out. And so for all the stuff we're talking about in cybersecurity, we don't have a system of measurement that works well yet. We don't have the most fundamental basic understanding of what we're trying to accomplish to start to measure it. And without measurement, you can't do engineering. And without engineering, you don't have this reliable, repeatable, and so forth. Having said that, the people that design integrated circuits and the hardware and so, they've been working for many, many years. And we have incredibly reliable, incredibly fast, mechanisms, right? So the mechanisms fail, but they have a failure rate which we can detect, and we know very well how to build them more reliable and what it costs to do so. So we can make that trade-off for risk at the hardware level and at the physics level, right? And at the software level, there's a separation between software and hardware. The software people just do not have the disciplines that the hardware people have, period. And software engineering, as much as it tries to get there and achieve some high reliability for certain kinds of systems, it's very difficult to do at scale, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of testing and a lot of analysis to do it well. So what we have is the race to market. And frankly, the race is a good thing, right? So all this race has produced, let's see, my phone, which allows me to go anywhere and find out and get routed and call for help if I need it. And, tells me the temperature and tells me all sorts of great stuff, right? And all the IoT technology, which makes the world better, right? We can detect and track and mitigate disease so much better than we ever could before, except, we're friggin' so stupid we ignore it, right? Okay. But the point here is the world's improving. The technology is improving stuff, but it's not perfectly reliable. And so until we learn to make it more reliable and still run at speed, we're going to eternally have this, or until that time comes, have this race between doing better, more, things faster and having them work pretty darn well, and having somebody come along and break them intentionally, right? So the supply chain issue, the bill of materials issue, fundamentally, if you can't do an inventory, you're missing the picture, right? This was many years ago. In the last 20 years, I guess, there was a study done that showed that the vast majority of negative consequences associated with cyber events stemmed from a lack of inventory. That is either something you didn't know you have, right, in terms of a physical thing, or content you didn't know was there. That's where the vast majority of things go wrong. Well, guess what? That's a lack of inventory. Well, bill of materials is about inventory, and about this inventory here has this sub part of it that's an inventory that came from somewhere else. And by the way, all these things also have that piece of inventory. So if this goes bad, all those things go bad. Interdependencies, supply chain, risk aggregation, right? It all piles together. And when one of these things changes, change control, because that change doesn't just affect this, it affects everything down the line. So, we need to just embed this. And what that does, we'll ignore for the moment, whether the mechanism itself can be believed. Assuming the mechanism works, then we can credibly believe that there hasn't been a change in this thing, right? Right. And so if it was bad before, it's bad now. If it was good before, it's good now. So whatever reliability and testing and everything else we did before is still true. And to the extent we were uncertain and unsure of it, we're just as unsure as we were. And when it changes, we're now more unsure. And so we have to do some things to make ourselves sure again. You have these, bugs that are out there for 10, 20 years that have been identified for 10 or 20 years that are still there. Yeah, they're there. Okay, so what? If somebody exploits them, okay, we're screwed. Log-J, whatever comes along, and the privilege escalation in Linux comes along, and you have to deal with it. You could have dealt with it then by doing an enormous amount of testing and analysis, and in a recurring fashion since then until now, continued to test as you learn more about what can go wrong, and got new techniques, and have figured it out sometime earlier. Or you can let the bad guys do it for you, and it doesn't cost you anything, right? So they'll figure it out, they'll exploit it, and then it costs you a bunch now, but you didn't pay all that price along the way. So there's this whole other issue of, do I do it now? Do I do it preemptively, or I do it post hoc? And a lot of, in cybersecurity, people think that risk is something you eliminate, whereas in any business person, you say we take risks for rewards. So they're trying to take risks for the rewards. They're just trying to make sure they know what those risks are. So that's mistake number one, right? And then there's this other mistake that says we have to prevent everything instead of figuring out what's worth preventing, at what level consequence it's worth waiting to detect and react. Can we detect and react in a timely enough fashion? Win-Schwartz, time-based security, right? Can we detect and react fast enough to make it effectively the same as prevention? And then there's everybody out there that says, oh, as soon as something goes wrong, everything fails instantly. Baloney. It takes time for stuff to go wrong, right? Not a lot of time, but maybe enough time. So maybe you don't have to go fix everything in advance. Maybe you can wait until you detect certain things, right? But what you need to do is anticipate what those kinds of detections are, so you know which things you can wait for and how long you can wait. Right? And it's more cost efficient to have certain things go wrong. And then, of course, there's planned obsolescence, which is a whole different world. So that's a beginning of the answer.
You know, right. And I'm going to take that as a yes, right? Because, as you know, we just, you and I just.
What you're saying, Chris, is I believe.
Well, what you're talking about is forces that are building up that have to be addressed to go forward. And those,
or not, because we're going forward one way or the other, Chris.
Right. Well, we this has been a long run. So, Fred, I want to thank you immensely for this. Everything you've done for the industry, for all the time, for all of us, and for the time here. I want to add on the trust level to your point early in the conversation. Some of you who follow me in certain social medias know that I've been befriending a wild bird, a little tiny Canadian bird, for the last 2 months now.
Which has come to trust you.
Comes to the boats every day and eats, and Donna feeds him and so forth. And we call him Sticks. He's going to be migrating back to Canada.
They bind to you, and they have these wonderful experiments with these flocks of birds where a woman in a boat, floats in the boat in front of them and becomes the leader of the flock, and they're now family members, right? So they're bound to you for life.
So we're wired, not just us. We as thinking creatures are wired for trust and belief and so forth. We tend to go in that direction. I think we're building technology that actually helps with that. But the lights are still on and still working today. So with that, Fred, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening, spending your time with us. Have a great day.